Okay, so hello everybody. I am just wanting to remind you that Pablo is going to take some very general photos. If there's anyone who really doesn't want to be in the photo, we have some red stickers over there, so you can put one sticker there. But they are going to be very general. And welcome everybody. We are very glad to be here, and we wanted to start these events with a very general presentation and introduction from CAE, the Center for Animal Ethics in UPF, and they are the ones that are hosting it. And to have this, we have Olafsson with us that is going to give this introduction. So thank you very much for coming, and let's start with the event. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I will be talking a bit about the Center for Animal Ethics from the Universitat Pompeu Fabra in case there's anyone who wants to know more about it. We are a think tank that's based in the university, and we focus on animal ethics from a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach. This means that we are trying to extend and to promote non-specist ethical approaches in academia, but also in political spheres, in media, and in public opinion. Our work mainly focuses on disseminating, promoting, and producing non-specist research that is grounded on animal ethics, but also on advising civil society groups, organizations, and to try to influence in some political decision-making. At the moment, it has been directed for now 10 years. This is our 10th year anniversary. Co-directed by the UPF professors Núria and Míriam from the Department of Communication and Paula Casal from the Department of Law. In a total, we are a big group between the scientific board and the advisory board, 42 researchers. And when we mean about interdisciplinary, is that there are both philosophers and communicators, but also people that work from law, anthropology, psychology, literature to support the center. We have also recently started a scientific journal called the Animal Ethics Review. And within this 10-year anniversary, we are hosting several events, including this one. One of them is currently on exposition. I don't know if you've been able to see the exhibition that's in campus right now. It will be in campus for more than 2 months. And it's titled When the Monkey Met the Fox, The Endless Betrayal. It talks about the complex relationship between human beings and non-human animals with the works of Ruth Montel Arias and Carlos Alba. And another of the events that maybe some of you are interested in is the Compass conference that we are hosting on June. It's called Compass Lobbying and Compassion, Interest Groups, Discourse, and Non-Human Animals. And the Congress title is Compassionate Futures. We'll be accepting abstracts until the 15th of February. And the conference is going to be on the 17th, 18th, and 19th of June. So it is a pleasure to be able to be hosting this and having people from the very center like Daniela here amongst the speakers. And I leave the rest of the talk to all of you. So thank you for accompanying us both online and in person.
Okay, so yeah, as I was telling you, we are very excited for this event, and I am especially excited for this event, actually, because you will see, but I think that my background is very closely linked to the topic that we are going to talk about today. And, well, we are organizing this. CAE is hosting it, and Effective Altruism Barcelona, this local group where I am an organizer. I am Ricard, and I am organizing this group alongside Mel Brennan, who is already here. And yeah, we have these three very amazing experts, and we are very happy to have them here. And they are going to talk about the effective animal advocacy. We are going to know more about it, and they are going to tell us like their main challenges, their tasks, their fields, etc. So first, let's go with my background, as I was telling you. because I myself consider, okay, how does it work? The clicker. Thank you. So yeah, I consider myself an animal advocate, an animal activist, and I have been using my skills to try to address this area, this field, these problems. So I am a translator myself, and as you can imagine, I have been translating lots of videos and documentaries that talk about animal rights, animal welfare, and plant-based diets. One example of this would be this documentary called Dominion. Maybe some of you know about it. And it's very hard to watch. And as you can imagine, it's even harder to translate it. I was crying the whole time when I was translating the subtitles. And it's narrated by all these very cool people that I'm sure that you are familiar with them. Then another documentary I translated is this one, Eating Our Way to Extinction. That's, in this case, it talks about the relationship between animal exploitation and all the effects it has to climate change and our planet and the environment. In this case, Leonardo DiCaprio was involved and Kate Winslet was producing it and also narrating the documentary. Very interesting stuff and very informative, actually. Then I also translated more than 100 videos for nutritionfacts.org. Maybe some of you already know it. It's a scientific organization that talks about all the benefits of a whole food plant-based diet for our health. And the founder of this organization is this guy here, Michael Greger. He's very funny, but he has also written lots of books, and every week he publishes free content about this field. Then I also was an interpreter for a talk by Dr. Andrew Knight, and he is always talking about the possibilities of cats and dogs thriving in a plant-based diet. Spoiler, yes, they can. And I was being an interpreter for his talk in the last Vegan Fest in Terrassa. Then I am also a music artist, and last November, in the 1st of November, the World Vegan Day, I published an album called Parets de Vidre, Glass Walls, that talks about all the problems that animal exploitation has in our world, and also all the alternatives that we have to try to tackle this and to try to reverse it. And finally, I am right now translating this amazing book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows. Maybe some of you are already familiar with it, into Catalan. And in September is going to be presented in the next Vegan Fest, but we are also trying to organize an official presentation by Melanie Joy here. So let's see if that can happen. Maybe we are going to talk with CAE to make it possible, because Melanie Joy is very excited. This book already turned 10 years old, and it's very informative in the subject of the psychology of eating animals. So yeah, as you can see, I have dedicated lots of hours, lots of efforts, lots of energy to do all these actions here. But sometimes, from time to time, a light bulb comes on in my head. And I wonder, are all these actions effective enough? Because I am very passionate about it. I am good at it, I expect, I hope. And I also can make a living doing it, because most of these actions have been volunteer, but the translation of the book, thank God, is being paid. So here's where effective altruism comes into the picture. We have been organizing Effective Altruism Barcelona, Mel and me, and we have organized lots of actions that try to teach people what they can do with their time in the most effective way. So it has been an amazing journey last year. And in this local group that is called Effective Altruism Barcelona, we organize lots of events like expert talks. This would be a very good example, one-on-ones, career guidance, co-working sessions. And we are trying to make everybody know or understand this, how they can spend their times, their energy, their money, their careers into the most effective way. So here's where these two passions of mine converge somehow, because I'm very passionate about animal activism, but I'm also very passionate about effective altruism. So that's why I'm so excited to be hosting this event here and moderating it, because we today have three amazing experts that are going to explain us how we can still be animal activists, but at the same time be as effective as possible. So thank you very much for being here. I am very glad, very happy. I really admire your work. I would like to introduce the speakers to you. First of all, we are going to have Daniela Walhorn. She works in Rethink Priorities, and she is the director of research and animal welfare there. Then we are going to have Míriam Martínez. She works in OBA, Obserbatorio de Bienestar Animal, and she's also the director, the manager of welfare, fish welfare there. And finally, Björn is working in Faunalytics, and he is a research liaison, right, in that organization. So without further ado, we are going to have everybody speaking about their tasks, their day-by-day work, their main challenges, and why is it so important to be thinking and be conscious about their areas, their cause areas. So big round of applause for them, and thank you very much.
Eso. Y ahora se va a ver todo.
Ya tienes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Daniela. I wanted to get started with a question for you. How many animals do you think that are alive on farms at this moment? Do you have a sense, roughly? Sorry, what? I didn't hear. Billions? Okay. Trillions. Hope you're wrong. Someone else? Do you have a sense if we say billions around what, or if we say trillions, is that a plausible idea, roughly?
Are you thinking vertebrates or invertebrates?
I'm saying animals. Okay, so no more guesses? Okay, so we have estimated that there are around 450 billion individuals on farms at this very moment. This means that by each of us, there are roughly 56 animals on farms right now. And who are they? Who are they? Typically, when we say farm animals, we think of big animals, mammals like cows or pigs. And indeed, these animals make an important part of those animals that are used for food production. But if we take them into account, we can see that when they are compared to the total of human population, they do not reach half of the total of humans alive on Earth at this moment. These numbers are pretty sad, but we also need to take into account that we do not only farm mammals, those big animals. We also farm other individuals like chickens, hens, or fish. And when we account for them in the picture, we are going to see that the figures, the numbers are way, way higher. The chickens that are farmed for the meat, for example, they make up something roughly around 26 billion individuals that are alive on farms at this moment. And when we consider fish, dated and some estimated that we were talking about more than but probably this figure currently is way higher. But moreover, we don't just farm vertebrates. We also farm smaller individuals like crustaceans and insects. And you may wonder, some people have asked me, like, insects, really? Like, we don't eat so many insects. Is that a common thing, maybe elsewhere? Well, the truth is that in some geographies in the world, insects are used as food. However, most of that are not actually to be consumed by humans, but are farmed to be used as feed for other farmed animals like fish, like pigs, like chickens. If you're interested, we recently published a report on the topic. So when we take those smaller animals into account, you can see that the initial figures we saw about cows and other mammals are way lower when we take into consideration these other smaller individuals that we use for food and food feed production. And moreover, there are other animals for which we have no data at all. So all these animals likely endure miserable conditions on farms. Some of them do not survive. And those who survive, well, we kill them. We kill in a year something around 1.8 trillion individuals. And you can see in this graph, most of them are insects, followed by shrimp. But as you know, we kill other animals that we do not farm. We also kill other animals that we capture from the wild, like fish. So when we take that into account, these figures are really catastrophic. We estimated that we kill every year something around 26.8 trillion animals for food production. And as you can see here, the 99% are invertebrates. And I'm here counting just invertebrates for which we have produced estimates. There are other invertebrates for which we do not even have numbers yet. So this is very sad. I'm sorry to bring this bad news. And here one may wonder, okay, these are just figures, but maybe they do not matter that much if these animals say they're not sentient, or if the majority of them are not sentient. Unfortunately, according to the latest evidence, it looks like they might be sentient. We believe that there is at least a decent chance, at least 1% likely, that some large group of invertebrates may be sentient. I'm thinking of octopi and other crustaceans like crabs, lobsters, and decapod shrimp. And also insects. More recent evidence suggests that insects might be sentient. We know very little about insects, but all that we know so far suggests that they may feel pain. But someone may wonder, okay, maybe they feel pain, maybe they're sentient, but actually they have happy lives. However, it looks like they do not. Some of the work that we do is trying to understand the lives on farms of some of the most neglected animals, like shrimp, other crustaceans, and also the welfare of animals like insects used mainly for feed production. So we believe that animals matter, that animal welfare is an important global priority because of the scale of the problem, because it has been historically greatly neglected. We don't dedicate much resources to this issue. And despite that, we have seen that this problem can be solved. We have seen important progress, especially over the last few years. Something that I wanted to share with you is a big insight that has been part of our work, is that when we say animals, we're mostly saying invertebrates because they are the majority of animals that we use for food production, but moreover, they are the majority of animals that exist on Earth. I'm not talking today about animals living in the wild, but I would love to talk about it if you're interested. So invertebrate welfare is within the topic of the problem of animal welfare is probably one of the most important animal issues because of the scale of the problem, as we saw before, and also because of the little resources that have been dedicated to these problems and the little consideration that these animals receive. And then if this is a big issue, the next question that emerges is, can we do something about it? Or can we help animals more effectively? And this is the type of questions that we ask ourselves at Rethink Priorities. This is part of the work that we do, trying to figure it out. When we say animal welfare, what are we talking about? Which are the animals that are mostly harmed by our actions? Or which are the greatest groups of animals that suffer in the world, regardless of whatever cause they're suffering? That is why wild animal welfare is also an issue that we address, although I don't have time to touch it today. And roughly what we do is to advance and pioneer change for animals that is based on evidence and reason. And we do that by researching this type of questions, trying to figure out solutions for animals, and we try to coordinate different people when we can come up with solutions that look promising, and when those when research or coordination themselves do not lead to action, we try to innovate and pilot some interventions ourselves. We, for example, try to see if there are ways in which we can actually alleviate the suffering of some of the most neglected animals, like shrimp, used for food production, and getting agreements with some retailers that use very cruel practices for when shrimp are used for reproduction and also when they're killed. So that is a little bit of what we do. Happy to take any questions and discuss a little bit more of our work. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm Míriam.
Ahora, okay. Okay, so I'm the animal welfare manager in the Animal Welfare Observatory. We were called Equalia before, and I'm a veterinarian. I studied here in the university, the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and in fact, it was while I was studying during my career in some practices where my path into veganism and animal advocacy started. We needed to go to a pig farm to Okay, so I was saying, I was there. We were taken to a pig farm, to the mothers unit, and we needed to help mothers to give birth, because maybe you might know that pigs have been selected to have more and more piglets, and now they have double. Maybe 30 years ago they had 6 or 7, now they are having 16. So I was there trying to help a mother to give birth, because she has already given birth to 8 or 9 piglets, and she was completely exhausted. So I had to take the rest of them, 5, manually from her inside. And it was really, well, a situation in which I couldn't feel happy, of course. And I realized that this animal that was a sentient being was being treated like a machine. And not only her, but the rest of moms that were there in different cages, because they are in cages for parturition and then for 3 weeks with all their piglets around them. And in these cages, they cannot move. They just can stand up or lay down, and they cannot even escape from their piglets. And this is something a mom needs, because I'm a mom and I know you need some rest at some moments. So, well, I decided I will dedicate my life to change this food system, which was, of course, unfair, totally unfair. After working for 8 years in FADA, which is another an NGO based here in Barcelona, working to against the abuse of animals in entertainment, dolphinaria, zoos, tourism activities, and humane management of species. I was doing a lot of things around animal advocacy, but then 2 years ago, I decided to focus my career into something more effective, and that's why I started in Animal Welfare Observatory in OBA, as we call it. We work to get a world without factory farming, and our work is mainly focused into some of the species that are more that are produced in the highest amounts. As Daniela was saying, there are many. I mean, it's incredible the amount of animals that are alive right now on farms in this moment and that are being killed every day. You can see here that, well, we normally, we are focused on chickens, hens, and fish. Of course, there are many more, but we decided to put all our efforts here, and we do campaigns, policy, and awareness, public awareness, trying to change corporates and institutional laws and policies. So today I will talk you about the specific work we do for fish, because you can see here, and Daniela has explained to you, fish are one of the groups that are produced in the highest amounts on farms. More than 100 billion fish are killed every year, and this only accounts for fish and not for other aquatic animals that she was explaining. And we are not counting here the fish that are wild caught from fisheries. And this is just an estimation, because normally the data is given in tons, because they don't really care about the individuals, so they count them as tons. Recently, the fish from aquaculture have surpassed the quantity of animal products that come from fisheries. This is a graph from FAO, from the Food and Agriculture Organization, and some years ago, fisheries was the main source to get aquatic products, but with the increase of aquaculture, right now, more than the 50% of the aquatic products come from aquaculture. The main region where aquaculture is increasing is Asia, as you can see in the table there. Especially with China, with a huge difference from the rest of the countries. But well, in in Europe, we have a high number, which is not trivial, especially with Norway, with their high production of salmon. In the European Union, without Norway, of course, the main species produced are these ones. So not salmons, but their cousin, the rainbow trout, and sea bass and sea bream. especially in the Mediterranean area. As you can see there, France, Greece, Italy, and Spain are the main producers of this species. In fact, Spain is on top of ranking within the EU in the production of aquaculture, and together with and after Greece, if we count only fish. So this is a map from the Ministry of Agriculture of Spain. You can go inside this link. It's quite, it's nice to play a bit with it because you can filter by species and region. So it really shows you how the situation is now with aquaculture. And here with this map, I filter only for sea bass, sea bream, rainbow trout, and tuna, because tuna is also fattened in cages. Sorry, they are caught from the sea, but then brought to the sea cages, and then they are fattened there to be sent, especially to Japan. So all these farms are here, sea bass and sea bream and tuna, especially on the coast, because they are raised in sea cages, and then in the continental area, the rainbow trout. So that accounts for more than 100 million fish, and it's a lot. So it's not as big as the number we were talking at the beginning, but it's really important to think about what should we be doing to change their lives. Because fish, in fact, they are not, as you can have seen, they are not one species. There are thousands of species of fish, but we normally talk about it like it was only if it's just one. And because we have really that's a big knowledge gap in the society around these animals, because normally we feel some kind of empathy to mammals or to other animals that live on land, but it's very difficult to feel or to think what or how is their life if they are living down the sea, in the ocean. And for that reason, because the society can't feel and can have this empathy for these animals, the legislation is also, normally it goes really a big after the society. So legislation is very flat here. There's very few legislation around fish and how they should be treated on farms. And for that reason, right now, fish farms, we don't have time, I think, now, but if you can see these videos from investigations from Serie Animali and Franz Weber, you would see how fish are treated on farms in crowded conditions with no environmental enrichment, and they manage them without respect because they are just numbers for them. And that's why we need to do something, because science has shown that fish are sentient in this case, and they can feel pain. So we need to make sure that if we are farming these animals, at least we should try to reduce their suffering. So from my organization, we decided to work at the beginning with the industry. So together with another NGO called Compassion in Wolf Farming, and some scientists from different universities, we proposed to the Spanish Association of Aquaculture Producers to write some basic guidelines to have something to start with to guide farmers on how to treat the animals. So we have published these 3 volumes, one general, then for sea bass, for sea bream, and the rainbow trout is about to come. But this is just like minimum and basic requirements, because they are agreed among different stakeholders that have different interests. But at least it's a minimum, and we are really happy, and it's a big success because it may serve as a reference for future legislation, for example. But it's just they are just recommendations. They are not compulsory, and that's a shame, of course. In fact, one of the recommendations they give here is that fish should be stunned before being killed, which is something that happens usually and is mandatory for other land animals, but it's not happening with fish. So they are killed being completely conscious. Normally, what they do now, and the common practice, is that they take fish away from the water with nets or with pumps, and then they leave them in a bucket filled with ice, and fish are left there to die by themselves. And it can take 20, 40 minutes for them to die, depending on the species and the conditions. And this is something that can be avoided because there's already some technology to stun them, so to make them lose the consciousness in less than 1 second, so they can avoid feeling this suffocation or anxiety or the pain that may be feeling in these minutes, right? We commissioned a study to the Animal Welfare Education Center that's a startup from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And we commissioned this report for CBAS and CBRIM, trying to see what should be better for this species in terms of slaughter. And the conclusion was that they should be electrically stunned. Of course, the methods that are proposed, this one or another, are not pretty because we're talking about killing animals, but and are not perfect, but they are there to reduce suffering. So we really want companies to use them because they are available. And that's why we also started to work with retailers and with producers directly to make them introduce this type of technology in their farms. And last year, we had some success with that, and all these companies that have the biggest farms in Spain, Turkey, and Greece agreed to implement stunning in their farms. This is something that they can do from one day to the other, so they have a deadline, and it's theoretically, and I hope they will be implemented. It will be implemented in 2027. But you may be thinking that slaughter is really just a small part of a fish life, and it's true. Fish, these species are raised for and live in these conditions for 1 or 2 years. So this is a very small part of their lives. And as I said, the stunning systems are also not perfect, and there's a big scientific gap that needs to be addressed to make them better and to be adapted to the commercial conditions to every species, because and this is something we will have with other interventions that we may wish to see on farms, that each species is different and they may need a different thing, so they have different requirements. A tuna doesn't need the same like a tilapia or a sea bass or a turbot. So a lot of science and a lot of research is needed specifically for each of them. Then we have another challenge, which is transparency. There's a big lack of transparency in this sector, and also with labeling. Now, if you go to the supermarket and want to buy a fish, you will see, luckily, if the fish was wild caught or it comes from aquaculture. And maybe you can see the country where it comes from, where it was killed. But sometimes, the trade is not that simple and not that transparent, and they may have been born in one country and then go to be fattened in another and then come here to be processed. But there are some, you won't see anything about how they were raised or the welfare they had. Now there are some certificates that are starting to introduce a bit of some criteria around animal welfare. but these are private labels and they are not mandatory. Normally, until now, these certifications normally would show how environmentally friendly fish are. And this is the narrative that the industry is giving to all of us, the industry and some governments as well, because they are investing in that, which is that fish are healthier than other alternatives, other animals that are produced and that are more environmentally friendly. They even compare it with fisheries, of course, and it seems now that aquaculture is going to save the marine ecosystems because it's the alternative, and they want to stop the monster of fisheries by promoting aquaculture. But the truth is that, aquaculture is not as sustainable as they say, and we have already seen some consequences. They are, for example, promoting these RAS systems, which are recirculating aquaculture systems, which are hyper-intensive farms, cages, where they can control everything, and they reuse the water. So that's why they say it's more sustainable. But they use lots of electricity, and it has already happened with salmons, with salmon industry, that there might be mass mortalities. That, of course, it's important for the animals because they have died, but it's a loss of resources as well. Then they are also promoting, like the species we have been seeing now, species that are carnivorous. So these fish need other fish to be fed. So they rely, and they are totally dependent right now on small pelagic fish that are wild caught in the coasts of Peru, Mauritania, Senegal. And this has also added the social injustice. It's detrimental for the environment. And it also comes without any comment or any solution for the welfare of these species that are being caught. But the thing is that now the government is funding this type of species and even new ones. They want to close the cycle for tuna so they can have them already here. They don't need to cut them in the sea, so they can breed them on the farms. And the same for octopuses, which are also carnivorous. I think you can see there are many challenges here, and that's why we think this is an area that needs a lot of advocacy and initiatives, not only here but everywhere. And I hope you join this cause too. And if you have more questions, I can answer. I will try to answer later on, or you can write to me here. Thank you. Just click here.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, great. So thank you for the two great presentations illustrating the scale of the problem that we're up against. My name is Björn, I'm from Faunalytics, and I'm interested in thinking about advocacy tactics and how we can use research as a tool, as a guide, as a strategy to fix these problems that have been so beautifully, if tragically, explained by these two panelists here. So I want to start by asking, who's familiar with my organization? If you know Faunalytics, raise your hand. Okay, about a third. That's good. No, I love this. I love this. I'm used to people knowing Faunalytics, so now I get to talk about Faunalytics, so this is great. Faunalytics, you might notice our name, Fauna Analytics. We do research on behalf of animals. We are the oldest and largest animal advocacy research organization in the world, and we have three main tools or tactics that we use. Number one, we do original research. We conduct studies. They are typically in the social sciences, things like psychology, political science, things like that. about ways to benefit the entire movement. The second is research curation. We collect research studies from other researchers, put them in our library. Right now we have 7,000 articles in our library that is free to access, completely accessible, and it's all written in an easy, lay-friendly language, very easy to understand. We're not interested in jargon. We're not interested in making things too complicated. And we have research studies from these organizations as well in the library that we have summarized. And the third thing that we do is we have pro bono support. So if you're an advocate, either professionally or a volunteer or just independently, and you have questions that could be answered through research, like let's say you're thinking of which tactic to use or what type of animal to work with or how to frame a message, we can talk to you pro bono, virtually, in person, and help you figure out the answer to the research question as best as we can. Some questions aren't really answerable just yet, but if they are, we'll help you. So this is our slogan with a beautiful little rooster. Animals need you, you need data. So that's what we do. We have all the data. And this is our team, just at the conference that we went to last year. We're about 14 people in total. So we're not that big, but I think we have a pretty good impact. Okay, so that's what we do. We do research, but why? Why do we do research? Why is research important? Who cares? It's just numbers and data, right? We've researched research, very meta, and we found out why people use research. Like, why is this important? What is the benefit of this? How can this actually benefit advocacy? We've categorized them into 5 different groups. So let's go one by one. The first way that advocacy needs research is for legitimacy purposes. So we need to present ourselves and the movement as a whole as driven by logic as well as empathy. If anybody here is a vegan, I'm sure many people are either vegan or curious about veganism or animal advocacy, you probably know that we're often stereotyped as hippies or tree huggers, or people kind of, like we're not often considered as very like serious people in the grand scheme of things. So we need research to show that we are driven by logic, not just, we have a pet chicken or whatever. Nothing wrong with pet chickens. I love pet chickens. But we need to kind of demonstrate a well-rounded reason to believe in animal advocacy. So I have a couple of examples. These are from our library. This is a study about chicken ethology. It has data about sentience and consciousness from chickens, basically showing, and similar to what you were talking about, like fish can feel pain, fish have sentience. This is the type of research that demonstrates that we're not just, silly tree huggers or environmentalists. We have reasons to do this stuff. And then this is the sustainability angle. We're trying to address factory farming and animal agriculture because it actually materially negatively affects the world that we live in a negative way. So this is very helpful, like things like UN reports, peer-reviewed research in big journals. We need to demonstrate our legitimacy. The second reason is internal decision-making. I'm going to come back to this one later on because this is my favorite one. Internal decision-making, we are setting targets, priorities, changing our strategies, changing our decisions. We need to be considering changing tactics when necessary. If you've been doing something for 20 years and then a research study comes out showing it's not very effective, that's a tough pill to swallow. But we have to swallow it. We have to be able to change and pivot when necessary. We did a big study about 2 years ago called Planting Seeds, the Impact of Different Tactics on Diet Change. This is a very important study. It's a bit controversial because some people didn't like the results. Let's look at, this is for people who have experienced these forms of advocacy, which ones were most influential in getting them to reduce or eliminate meat products or animal products from their diet. So this is specifically about diet change, but we can see that some of the things that people might engage with or do as tactics might not be as effective as others. Disruptive protest is fourth to last. We got a lot of protests, you might say, from protest groups. They love to do that, about why this is not effective. So we need to keep in mind that if we're trying to accomplish a goal, which in this case might be diet change, and we're using a tactic that might not be effective, we might need to shift either our goal or our tactic. I want to make one thing clear about this. This is only for diet change. For other forms of advocacy, like political change, getting companies to shift their producers or things like that, these tactics may be more effective. For example, protest is more effective on corporations than it is on individuals. But if you're trying to convince people to reduce meat intake, this kind of data is going to be very critical. Okay, number 3 is movement building. This one's kind of the behind the scenes research. So in the NGO world, in the nonprofit world, we need research and data to just kind of make it collaborative, sustainable, and I mean sustainable in the long term, not environmentally sustainable, although you can make it environmentally sustainable as well. Just trying to make it more resilient, make sure that people aren't going to leave, that we're drawing the talent in, we're drawing people in so that we're going to be more effective. This one isn't really the sexiest form of research, but it is very important. We did a study, this came out like 4 months ago, I think, no, August, okay, last year, about compensation in the farm animal advocacy sector. This was specific to the United States, but it still has illuminating findings for the entire world. We looked at salaries of NGOs and nonprofits. We found a couple of things that were a little bit alarming. One is that leadership in the movement had salaries that were about 20% lower than leaders in similar movements like climate justice or things like that, which indicates that there's not as much money for talented leadership. And we did a follow-up study about 2 weeks ago about why leaders are leaving the movement. And we found out that burnout and a lack of executive board support were 2 of the biggest reasons. And more disconcerting to me is that there was a pay gap in the movement between marginalized people and non-marginalized, and marginalized in this context was LGBTQ, people of color, and disabled people had a 15% pay gap between other individuals. It wasn't a gender pay gap, so it was a little bit of a different kind of problem that we're dealing with as opposed to some other sectors. So this is important. We need to address this. We also found that marginalized people were way more likely to want to leave the movement for better pay, which makes sense because they are being underpaid. So this kind of data is important to get leaders in the movement to make it more likely to keep people in, pay them what they're worth, like make sure that they're being able to take care of themselves. Because in the NGO world, sometimes you think your money is just going directly to fixing the problem, but essentially a lot of the times you're paying the salaries of people who are fixing the problem, and they need to maintain their own lives or else they're not going to be able to actually do the work. So that's, again, not the flashiest data, but I think it is critical. It's kind of the foundational stuff. Okay, number 4, this is the sexy stuff. This is flashy. This is the sexy stuff. Catalyzing action. So this is when a study is trying to convince a stakeholder or a decision maker to make a specific decision. So this is usually quite targeted. For example, if you're talking to a politician and you're trying to convince them to support a ban on, or let's use your example. Let's talk about a politician or a corporation to involve electric stunning for fish. You would have to show them specific evidence that would be convincing to them to get them to make that decision. So you could show them, for example, evidence of fish sentience. You could show them public opinion polling showing that Spanish people think animals should be treated humanely. You should talk about, for example, how this may not affect their profit margins very much, so it's not likely to like have a huge blowback to them, for example. Things like that. You could show them case studies of previous companies who have involved electric stunning and shown that it didn't like make the company go under or anything like that. So these are basically tailored specific approaches to a stakeholder to convince them to enact some sort of pro-animal law, policy, decision, action, something like that. This, I would say, is the type of research that organizations are most likely to do themselves that are not specifically researchers. This is something that I help with a lot, and I think this is very fun. For example, I worked with a student organizer. This was a student at a university in California. And they did a poll of students who went to a specific cafe and asked them about how many of them could digest lactose, because lactose is less likely to be digested by people who are often racial minorities or things like that. And then they asked them, how much would you support a proposed policy to ban or to reduce the prices of plant-based milks on campus? And it was like 95% said they should make plant-based milks cheaper than dairy because it's more accessible and more, it's basically more equal for everybody there, because most of the students couldn't digest lactose very well and they preferred the plant-based milk. So then they did this poll, they showed it to the dean, and then across the entire university, they reduced the price of plant-based milk lower than dairy milk. So that's pretty cool. It's tailored. It's specific. It's often easier to do if you're not a researcher yourself. And then you can do a little presentation to the specific stakeholder and then get them to change their mind. So this one, in my opinion, is kind of like the flashiest, more fun part of research. This is one of our studies from 2 years ago. This one got quite a bit of media coverage. This one showed that even though animal agriculture is responsible for, at minimum, 14.5% of global emissions. I say at minimum because I think that number doesn't take into account indirect emissions from deforestation. It was only in newspapers when they mentioned climate change and reasons for climate change, it was only mentioned in 7%. And even fewer of those articles mentioned it as a cause of climate change. They often only mention animal agriculture as a victim of climate change. So talking about how it would affect food prices and things like that. So this showed a huge gap in media coverage of climate. And this got a lot of climate-oriented, relatively progressive publications to kind of rethink their stances a little bit. This was a collaboration with an organization called Sentient Media, who I actually used to work for, which is a factory farming specific media outlet. So this is another example of this was basically a study designed to kind of get media folk thinking about how their coverage is actually impacting their readers. Okay, number 5 is identifying problems. I think a lot of the work of these two people falls into this category, identifying where the fisheries are located or how many fish are actually being produced, for example, would fall into this. So we're looking for barriers, species, regions to address, sometimes with solutions alongside of it. So we're looking from neglected areas. We're looking for what are the things that we can work on to actually impact animals the most. One of our key studies that we've done is called Animal Product Impact Scales. We examined the exact food products that negatively impact animals the most. And we have this for all types of animal categories. For example, if you're trying to save the most chickens possible, you should convince a food manufacturer to remove chicken shreds and ground, as opposed to like a bunch of other examples, compared to like breaded chicken nuggets, for example. The reason being that in a chicken nugget, there are other ingredients there, and you need less like chicken meat to make the product. So if you're targeting suppliers or manufacturers, this is going to help you think about more strategically about which products are going to have the most positive impact to remove. This research is used by a lot of big organizations when they work with producers, for example. It's also used to track your impact. Okay, so that's in general why we need to be using research. Now I'm going to talk about my let's say, pet projects or the things that I'm most interested in. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier when I'm talking about changing tactics. So the most common question I get as a research liaison, as a research communicator is, okay, I want to save animals. I want to save animals, and what's the best way to do it? Tell me what to work on. Like, tell me with a project that's going to save the most animals. Okay, I love the energy, I love the enthusiasm, but that's not the right question to be asking. Because if we are to save animal lives, which is what we're hoping to do, there is no one single intervention or one single tactic that is going to reign supreme over all the others. Even in that graph I showed you earlier, books was at the top, for example. But books can only work in a larger ecosystem, for example. What's going to motivate somebody to pick up that book and read it? After they read the book, if they're curious about becoming a vegan, who's going to be there to give them nutritional advice? Who's going to be there to support them in a community afterwards? And then if they want to become an advocate, how are we going to make political change, for example? Like, a book can't change the laws, right? Because the problems we're up against are so multifaceted. We're talking about political laws that don't favor animals, corporations that value their profits over ethics. We're talking about individuals who often prefer convenience or price over ethics when in the supermarket. And because our problems are so multifaceted, our tactics need to be as well. So I don't think we should be thinking about ranking tactics. I think we should be thinking about how our tactics are working together to address our problems in different streams. Because we can't just go up to every single person on the planet and convince them to go vegan and then not change the food system. But also, we can't just change the food system if the consumer base isn't ready for those changes. And we can't go to politicians and get them to change the laws if the voters are going to vote them out the next election right away. Like, it all has to work together. So what I personally think is most effective is identifying what you're good at and doing that in the most effective way as possible. Because I'm not going to make a documentarian go to a protest. I'm not going to have a social media coordinator go lobby Congress or a parliament or whatever, right? We need to be working with our skills as effectively as possible. So I work on a series that I call Tactics in Practice. This is one example where I'm identifying different interventions and figuring out how to improve them based on the research as much as possible. So I have 4 of these that are not all published yet, but are complete from my end, and they will be coming out soon. 2 of them are published. I'm hoping to have about 10 to 12 of these done in the next year or 2. And each of them is a research-backed guide about doing the intervention better. So this is one of them about defaults and nudges. Does everyone know what a plant-based default is? Oh, no one. Love it. Okay, great. Okay, gotta talk about this. So if you want to order a vegan meal, you often have to go through more steps to get that food, right? You have to get a different menu. You have to read the bottom of the menu to like see the little V symbol, and maybe the V symbol is the same as the vegetarian symbol, so you're confused by it. Or maybe you have to ask the waiter for specific advice. Right? It's inconvenient. Right? I mean, I've been there myself. So in this instance, in most restaurants, supermarkets, cafeterias, dining halls, whatever, meat is the default. And if you want the non-default option, you have to go through extra steps. So a plant-based default is just switching it, where the plant-based option is the default. And if you want meat, you have to go through extra steps. So meat is still there, like it's still being served, but it's less convenient. So in practice, this means like you would have a separate menu with meat that people have to like ask for, or it's physically farther away from the dining hall or whatever it happens. Like there's different versions of this. But the benefits of this idea is that with a plant-based default, the 10 to 20% of the population who really, really wants meat in every single meal aren't going to have complaints. Like they'll still get what they want, they just have to work a little bit harder to get it. But then the 50 to 70% of people who are sometimes called, persuadables, or who will go with the most convenient option, will just go for the plant-based option, assuming it's, tasty and healthy and like not, a shitty veggie burger or whatever, like a good meal. That's important. It has to be a good meal. And the idea, these are very sustainable because you're not going to face as much backlash from the populations. I've looked at 4 studies that had ratings, like what's it called? People saying whether or not they liked it, and it has a 95% approval rating. That's the word, approval rating. So it's very high. People don't oppose this. And they work. When we have a meat-based default, I think the average was about 17%. In a plant-based default, vegan options are ordered about 75% of the time. So it's a huge bump. Very few people complain. And most people might not even notice. A lot of the times the people are just like, oh, it's like pasta and lentils, like they like it. They might not even notice. So I did a paper on this, and I had like 8 tips about how to implement this best, looking at past case studies and research. So there are a couple of things like make it tasty, make sure it's inclusive. You have to have buy-in from the cafeteria staff, things like that. I have another one on social media advocacy, so how to use social media better. The other 2 that I've worked on, one is about protests, and another one is about vegan challenges, like Veganuary, things like Meatless Monday, Desafío 22, things like that. Oh, and this is the last little plug. If you're an advocate and you are curious about this kind of stuff, we do free research presentations with our ambassador project. So this is free, you can request it. I don't have a QR code, but you can just Google Faunalytics Research Ambassador if you're curious, and we can do free presentations. We have a couple that are specific to university students as well, the things you can do on campus. So that's what I do, and I'm excited for your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And now for the questions and answers. Of course, you are all free to ask whatever you want. We thought that maybe I could have some questions ready so we can keep it going, and then you are less shy. So yeah, let me start with a question for you, Daniela. I would like to, well, first of all, like the shrimp farming is being extended and it's growing because they want to try to be in the same page as the global demand that is growing. And I would like to know if there are some countries or some regions that have more, where you feel the most potential or more immediate impact. And in these cases, what do you think that are the reasons for them being more impactful or being more promising?
Thanks. And you mean impactful in terms of doing work in those countries?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so shrimp production is a relatively recent industry that is not fully established. It's not as industrialized as the production of chicken meat, for example. So now we're still in the process of seeing this activity to become fully consolidated and industrialized. So we are witnessing very rapid growth. And around 80% of farm shrimp production is dominated by just a few countries. China is one of the largest producers in the world. However, there are other countries in Southeast Asia that also play an important role, and others in Latin America, mainly Ecuador. Ecuador is a case that has been, it's striking how the industry has grown over the last 5 years, so it's very recent, which also means that we are at a relatively early stage where we can shape, if possible, the direction of this industry or the practices that it adopts. And similarly, we have also seen important growth in other countries. As I mentioned before, in Asia, besides China, India plays an important role, and other countries in Southeast Asia like Indonesia, that's also a major player in shrimp production. So one organization like Shrimp Welfare Project, they're doing work with producers in India. They're having very important impact with by engaging with producers and trying to change some of their practices, how shrimp are treated during their lifetime, and also getting them to stand them when they are slaughtered, because otherwise they tend to suffer a lot during when they die. I think there is a low-hanging fruit in Ecuador. No one is working there. I would love to see an organization trying to influence farming practices in Ecuador, especially in given that the industry in a country like Ecuador is mostly for exports, and there is a lot of potential there to show producers that some of the countries where they are exporting those products, those animals, care about the welfare of animals. And there are some specific practices in the shrimp industry that I think could be changed now and reduce an important amount of suffering. I think Spain also, by the way, Spain is one of the main importers of shrimp in Europe. And there has been some progress in Europe, but Spain plays a critical role in the EU, but it's also one of the main importers of, so plays a critical role in the shrimp industry globally.
Nice, good to know in this case. Thank you for the answer. Then I also had a question for Míriam. We know that recently, there was a practice in fishing that is called bottom trawling, pesca de arrastre, pesca de arrossegament, and it was banned in Spain. So I would like to know, how do you think this can affect fish welfare, and how does this change OVA's work, especially in making sure that aquaculture practices don't worsen as an alternative to this?
Yes, well, on one side, they have banned it in Spain and other countries, but the truth is that they will keep doing this activity in other places with the social injustice that it comes together. And then, as I was explaining before, this is the narrative. No, they say they are banning the horrific, or the most awful practices like bottom trawling to get fish, but then they are promoting aquaculture, and this is something that affects us because if aquaculture is promoted and they invest money in closing cycles for new species or to give more room for aquaculture, then many and much more fish are going to be captive, suffering the conditions of aquaculture. Because right now, the consumption is not going to change unless we keep working into reducing the consumption of fish. So if we want to get the same amount of fish, then they would say that if we don't get it from the fisheries, then we should get it from aquaculture, right? And well, from our side, we want to make governments change in how they invest, because aquaculture is also referred, for example, for algae. So maybe the governments, the European Union, should be investing and changing the industry into algae, which can be also a nutritious way to feed the population without all the environmental impact and and not having animal welfare problems. So we will try to keep working into that. But yes, this is a new challenge that we may be leading and facing in the future.
Okay, thanks for the answer. And finally, I have a question for Björn. As you said, Faunalytics usually researches how to tailor advocacy to different audiences. So what have you learned about reaching some audiences, reaching some regions maybe or groups that are resistant to change? Have any strategies worked better than expected?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's what I work on all the time because some people don't want to change. What we call animal advocates tactic flexible, cause inflexible. In other words, they often act as if they won't change the cause that they're working for typically, but they often are more flexible to changing the tactics to get to the cause. So that's how I try to approach this. And this can be difficult when one of the two of them needs to change. For example, like we could go back to the protest example. Protest groups are often resistant to the idea that protests can't change individual diet change of the people who are watching a protest. Because I think about 5-10 years ago, this was very common. Protest groups were trying to convince people watching to actually change their diets. And that's not effective. And there's actually, in our study, people ate more meat after watching after a protest. It's the only intervention that had a backlash effect. Like other things like social media advertisements were just neutral, but then protests, they ate like point something more servings per meat afterwards a week. So when there is resistance to what people have been doing, and there's this sense of like almost futility, like I've been doing this for 10 years and was that all wasted? Was that all not effective? Did I waste 10 years of my life on this? That's difficult. So what I have to do is get people to pivot what they've been doing into something more effective. So if they're protesting for diet change, I say, okay, let's change the target of your protest and figure out a new way to do this. So it's not about getting a protester to just make a documentary. It's about figuring out a way to align their skills and their experience into a more effective goal. We're not going to change diets, but we can change a corporation to increase their plant-based offerings by 20% or something like that, whatever it happens to be. So what I try to do is I try to listen to what they are going for, what are they trying to do, and then modify the tactic to get to that goal as much as I can, which usually is just reducing suffering of either all animals or a specific species of animal.
Okay, so thank you for the answer. And now let's take this momentum and take the chance also to ask whatever you want, because I think this is a very good opportunity. Is there any questions here?
So I have two questions, if that is fine. So the first question is for Rethink priorities and OVA mostly. And it is like, when it comes to reducing animal suffering, does the means always justify the ends? So do you have a thought in your organization, any constraints upon what could be your strategies? Like, for example, we cannot promote the exploitation of animals, we cannot be speciesist or kill people or kill more animals in order to reduce the suffering of other animals. Like, are there some principles that you have thought? I don't know.
Yes, thanks for the question, and it's really nice to think about that, everybody. In our case, we take that in consideration in the terms of we envision this world without factory farming, but we never promote the consumption of any meat, not even the one that comes from not factory farms. So the idea is to use that as a strategy. And we don't want to promote meat consumption, of course, of any kind. So we have like this line that we don't cross, but when it comes to get, well, to be more strategical with specific audiences or stakeholders, of course, it's interesting to keep the narrative that like non-factory farms can be somehow associated with us or collaborating with us to go against factory farms. So it's very difficult to work in that terms because you need to keep this balance, not promoting it, but having them as collaborators at some points. And yeah, it's difficult to be in that position, but we think that's how we get things done right now. It may change or it may not work for specific actions, but for the ones we are taking now, it's working. And for example, trying to reduce the suffering of fish. Right now, we haven't been in the situation that reducing the suffering comes with or implies that more animals are killed right now. We haven't got this situation. So, but I guess we will think twice if that would happen.
I had another one, if I can. Okay, so I saw that you mostly talked about the suffering, the exploitation of animals used for food. Recently, I have been investigating upon other ways that animals can be exploited, like for example, honeybees, and mostly the vast majority of the economic benefit and the dependence we have on honeybees is because of pollination. So actually, there are, in talking about the individual honeybees, there are many honeybees, and there could also, I mean, we could change our diet to a diet that is mostly non-dependent on crops that are non-dependent on pollination. So I don't know if you have made any thoughts about that, or you have any studies like backing that up, or would you be interested in knowing, because I've made a little research. So I don't know.
Is that for?
Yeah. I think it's.
Yeah. So honey is an interesting one, and this is not my area of expertise, but I have read research that honeybees are not the only pollinator in the wild, and they're not even the most common type of bee pollinator compared to wild bees and wild species of bees. And in some parts of the world, honeybees have almost overtaken, due to production from humans, wild or native species. So I think that to assume that pollination depends on human production isn't entirely correct, because we could figure out other ways to benefit local populations of bees, to benefit that without encountering this, paradox here of like harming one animal while helping another. Somebody who's more familiar with environmental conservation could tell you more specifically about the bee species, but I think that's how I would frame the approach.
Yeah, if I can add something. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. And indeed, in some specific industries, some pollinators like honeybees are used massively. We looked into this some years ago. I don't remember exactly, but I do remember that almond production, at least in the US, we focus on the US because the techniques for growing different crops vary from country to country to some extent. But we focus on the US because it was easier, basically. And indeed, the only finding that I can remember for now is the massive use of these pollinators for almond production. And they are used for other types of crops as well. And these are some of the questions that we try to tackle and understand and see if there are some type of products that could cause less harms to other individuals that are indirectly affected by our actions. So yeah, that is something that we would love to figure it out or find clearer solutions. Yeah, we're also looking into the use of pesticides for different types of crops. That's, yeah.
Well, in the first presentation, I was a little bit shocked that there's no data about octopi, and I see some other sea animals where there's no data about their farming, how many animals are there. I mean, if there's enough evidence, or everybody, if there's one sea animal that everybody agrees about their sentience, and there's enough evidence out there, is octopi. Even I see sometimes posts about new farms that are open in Spain. So you see this kind of news and it shocks people. Even non-vegans agree that octopi are sentient beings. So they might disagree or not, but octopi is one of those. So why there's no regulation on that? Why there's no data? These farms can operate without providing any data on that, while there's enough data about all the sea animals.
Yeah, well, so indeed, there are no official data for any aquatic animal in terms of how many individuals. The data that I showed for the numbers of shrimp and also for insects and fish, that's data that has been produced by researchers relying on estimates of tones, as Míriam shared, because those animals are not counted individually. So we have to figure it out, like many factors, to kind of get a sense of how many individuals we are talking about. And for most of them, their welfare is not regulated at all, and in some cases they do not even fall under the category of farm animals. So there is no protection at all for them. There is no type of relevant consideration. And as you said, octopus farming is an emerging industry with a big hub here in Spain, with an important injection of funding from the government and the European Union. Fortunately, it looks like the industry is not taking off. I think, we should really try to prevent that from happening. But I think that a way more likely risk is that other industries that farm crustaceans that already exist could become fully industrialized in the next 10 years or so, and those numbers will likely skyrocket. Míriam, maybe you know more.
Well, what I know is that the octopus farm that was going to be will start in Canary Islands is not going further right now, but it was not because of welfare issues. It was for environmental issues and some documents that they didn't pass. But of course, we had a lot of demonstrations against that, and we have been tackling the government. But there's another one in Galicia, which has been approved. Right now, the farm is going to produce only larvae, not the adult form of octopus. So they are calling that as a scientific project, and that's why they are receiving the approval, because it's a scientific project in which they try to find ways to make octopus breed and survive in these conditions. And that's a big challenge, and we should be against that if we don't want to see octopuses farm in the future, because then other companies will take this knowledge on how to breed them in captivity and start to open farms for octopus.
Thank you. I have another question for Björn. You were talking about the plant-based default, and so I'm eager to know what strategies could be applied for students to go after the deans and convince them to have a plant-based default. I do believe as economists that agents, especially market economists, are motivated by economic incentives. That's what they drive them, especially if they are not vegan, they don't believe in veganism, or they haven't heard about it. So how to better strategize with these kind of people in order to convince them for such a thing, and whether economic incentives will be, kind of path to reach out to them.
Yeah, good question. So you're right, most people are motivated by economic incentives. But in the university setting, this economic incentive is basically, it goes through student enrollment and student satisfaction, right? Because that's where a lot of universities get their money and that's where their reputation lies. So most campaigners who are working on plant-based defaults tend to take two main approaches. So the campaigners tend to be motivated by animal ethics. Obviously the deans tend not to be most of the time. So they have to figure out these other convincing arguments. The first one tends to be some sort of climate pledge. Most universities have some sort of sustainability goal, usually public. It's just to demonstrate the university is, green and with the times and things like that. And often a way to reach that goal is to reduce the scope 3 emissions from the food systems. And plant-based defaults are a really good way to do that. And if you can align the default with the sustainability goal, that's usually, you're like halfway there. Another way, and this is something I mentioned with the California campus, is through student satisfaction. If you can demonstrate that the student body would benefit from this or wants this, then you can convince a stakeholder or the dean to enact it. So most students, when polled, will say that this is okay with them, or you can do a pilot program in like one cafeteria or something, or one specific area, and then poll the students afterwards and say, did you like this? Was this a problem for you? Most people will say that this is fine. It's usually above 90%. So if you can show that this is popular with students, it's going to meet their sustainability goals, and hey, you're benefiting animals on the side, usually that they'll go through with it. The negative outcomes tend to be when the staff doesn't have the training or the knowledge to enact this. So that's when the campaigns fail, it's usually because there isn't buy-in from the workers or the staff, which I think makes sense. So you have to, after the dean is on board, then the next step is to get all of the staff on board, even like, lunch ladies or anybody in the cafeteria. Just, talk to them, make sure that they understand what's going on here and that they're on board. But yeah.
Over here in the middle.
I have a question regarding OVA. I've actually never heard of the organization before, and I think it sounds very exciting. And I've heard about the Fish Welfare Initiative and I think it's called Center for Aquaculture Progress in Greece. And I'd be interested in how you position yourself compared to them, because what I understood is that they rather try to work with farmers and actually try to, I don't know, kind of improve their wins while also increasing the animal welfare, which sounds like win-win, which would be pretty great. And I'm wondering, would that work in Spain as well, or do you take another approach because it wouldn't work, or why would it not work maybe?
Well, thanks. Well, we were known before OVA as Equalia, so maybe that sounds a bit more to you. Yeah, I know those organizations. We try to work together and coordinate it with the rest of organizations that want the same as us, and we even decide strategies together. So in difference from there, we have been like campaigning or having a bit of more aggressive approach with companies in the past year. But at the beginning, we were also collaborating with them with the guidelines I showed you. We were in that project. But the thing is that we didn't see like really a change with them, that it was only words on a paper. So that's why we decided to go a bit more further with the actions, and we started to use footage and campaign activities to make them get these commitments published. So our position depends on the strategy or the situation. Right now, we are in this position. Like normally in this movement, there are like good cops and bad cops, but we all want the same. So we were at first the good cops, then we changed, and we don't know what will happen in the future. But the good thing is that the success and everything we have gotten so far is because we have all these different strategies working together and coordinated, and yeah, we sum together.
Hello. Hi. Question around the kind of the observatory and how obviously your main aim is to lower the consumption of fish, but in the end, how do you prioritize lowering the consumption and then lowering increasing the welfare? How do you make the decision, like in terms of strategy and in terms of dedicating resources to kind of improving the welfare, but at the same time as lowering consumption? Because obviously you dedicate some resources to increasing welfare, but then that means that resource goes away from lowering consumption. So how do you make the balance between the two? If you understand my question.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understood that, but you are saying how do we compensate, like working with fish welfare and at the same time trying to reduce consumption, right? Okay. Well, right now we are not working to reduce consumption actively. No, we are not doing that. There are other organizations trying to reduce consumption. So we are focused into changing the practices, introducing welfare aspects. We try to do it ourselves, and whenever we have an opportunity, of course, we tell people to reduce because it also helps for animal welfare. But actively, this is not one of our lines of work right now.
Second question was Björn, actually. In terms of like because you're trying to change the menus and make it's going back to the default conversation. Does it affect so if a canteen's selling meat products or veggie products in terms of profit, like does it actually affect profit of the canteens? If they sell more meat products, they actually make profit? I've always had a question around, say, supermarkets or restaurants and whether there's actually a profit involvement there. Why are they more incentivized to sell meat products or plant-based products? Is there some kind of decision-making around that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And for that reason, it's more difficult to get a plant-based default instituted in a place that is very driven by profit. So a restaurant is way more driven by profit than a university or a hospital or a prison or a city office or things like that. So most campaigners are focusing on those institutions that are less profit driven, especially hospitals, because they use a whole foods approach, and it's healthier if it's just, a whole foods plant-based diet, then the patients will have health benefits. So there's a big push there. However, there are people working within restaurants. And within restaurants, the defaults tend to be not as, let's say, all-consuming. Whereas in a university canteen, they might have the meat like entirely not visible, like you have to ask for it. In a restaurant, what they might do is instead of having a chicken burrito, a beef burrito, and a veggie burrito, they only sell a veggie burrito, and then you have to pay an extra €3 to add chicken to it, or something like that. So that is an example of like how you can modify the default to fit into the profit incentives of a restaurant. It's not as effective. Like it won't get like 75% vegan options like the way a university cafeteria will. But we've done case studies ourselves on a few restaurants that have like done that approach, and it does increase, like it doesn't decrease profit or customer satisfaction, because most people don't tend to notice this stuff. And if they just say, oh, I'll have the burrito, they get a vegan burrito or something like that. And it's as long as it's tasty, again, it has to be tasty. As long as it tastes good, they're not going to complain or have any problem with it. So it's tricky. Oh, and then you asked about like the profit margins of plant and vegetables, right? So there was one study in New York where this was a whole foods plant-based one. So this does not involve alternative proteins except for like tofu or something, but not like brand name alternative proteins. And because those products tend to be cheaper, like lentils, chickpeas, bulgur, things like that, and they were able to make, they didn't make profit because it's a hospital, but they reduced the costs of the meals that they served by, I think, like 50 US cents per meal. Not nothing, like it's pretty good when you multiply it across an entire hospital system. So I don't know of a larger scale study about this, but based on this case study, a restaurant could use whole foods, reduce profit margins, because I think we both know that alternative proteins tend to be more expensive at this moment. So that's one way to approach it. Yeah, I think I'm excited to see, hopefully alternative proteins can reduce the price in the future, and then we can get to that point where restaurants are going to be easier to target within 5 or 10 years.
Hello, hi for the 3 very interesting presentations. So Björn, you basically was trying to explain to us that there is not what is called in different audiences a silver bullet to address the situation. It's a very complex situation in terms of whether you approach from a grassroots communities or protest or advocacy or policy level, or working with the industry. So the question, or trying to get to the question, will be if a silver bullet solution may not exist, but the real question is not to whether we wait for one, because this kind of audience is always high behind that there is not a silver bullet to solve the situation, is how to create it, right? Because there could be different factors that we can use to create what we call a silver bullet in terms to find the solution. So could be the framework, the policies, the core, the new productive alternative-based models, and the catalyst be achieved in the narrative around diets. How do we integrate these elements to drive meaningful food systems transformation?
To extend the silver bullet metaphor, I agree that, like I was saying, there is no silver bullet. I don't think we should wait for a silver bullet. I think we should expand, oh my God, this sounds so American, expand the number of bullets that we have. we should be using all the tactics available to us to affect these different avenues of change. I'm gonna abandon the bullet metaphor now, okay. So, one of the biggest problems facing the movement of animal welfare is social change, because social change underpins all of these other avenues, right? If we want political change, we need people to vote for politicians who are going to do it. If we want corporate change, we want to make sure that consumers are choosing corporations who are better to animals. And then if we want diet change, people need to basically be accepting of animal-friendly diets or vegan or vegetarian, flexitarian diets. So to me, that's almost like the bedrock is this social change. And there's a million ways to affect social change. A big shift that I'm seeing in the last year in the movement is focusing away on individuals and working in communities. So like Mercy for Animals, for example, which is a big organization in the world, is trying to work within communities to advance diet change and pro-animal sentiments and belief systems, right? Because if we can advance social change within communities, eventually those will build and build and build, and they will stay resilient, and then that can underpin those three main areas that we're working on, which is individuals, policy, and corporations. Does that answer your question? A little bit? Yeah.
I agree with you, and I think this is a very complex problem that we are tackling, but we may not have the bullet, but we know that some bullets are better than others. And I think we do have some evidence that suggests that some forms of campaigns or interventions can be more cost effective than others, that could affect more animals per resources spent. And I think a good example of that is the work that the Animal Welfare Observatory has been doing with their with your cage-free campaigns, because those initiatives have created like greater welfare for animals with less resources than other type of interventions. And if we have the conditions for that sort of interventions to succeed, I think I would rather invest in those if we have some decent chances of making progress. And indeed, the work of NGOs pushing for cage-free commitments has driven major change of the egg industry in Spain. Spain is still falling behind when compared to the rest of the European countries, but still we have seen a progress over the last 5 years or so that we haven't seen before. And this has been because of the work of activists that are caring a lot for impact. Thank you, by the way.
We are at 8:30. We do have the room available until 9, I believe. So if you guys are happy to stay a bit longer, we could, if there's more questions. Otherwise, obviously, you're also free to go if you want to leave at any point. Lucas? Yeah.
Thank you. I had 2 very brief questions, one for Míriam. Hola, Míriam. So the question is, you talked about this fish guide that you agreed with other stakeholders, which you do not necessarily agree with, but you have to work with. And I was wondering, because at some point you said, this is actually not mandatory, right? Like they can ignore it. And I was wondering, how can we persuade them to actually follow those guidelines when they are not actually legally obliged to? And are there any incentives for them, maybe economically, maybe marketing-wise? I have no idea, but just wondering. And the second question, I'll just say it now. Björn, I'm just curious to know if these experiments on the plant default thing, which I was not familiar with, which I find very interesting, if they stick after they are done, do they usually continue over time?
If what sticks?
The plant default practice, let's say, in canteens or in restaurants or whenever they've experimented with it. If it is this limited to a study or a test, A/B testing that they do, or do they keep doing it over time? Or anyway, 2 questions, Míriam and Björn. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. The good thing of animal welfare is that, for us, is that normally it comes also with a benefit for the farmer, because if the animal has better welfare, they will survive and they won't need medications or extra investment in them. So normally it's a win-win, like she said. And in the case of the guidelines, this is something that they should and may have in mind in the future, because as one of them starts using the specific or the requirements and the type of management that is written there, and they have they are better producing their fish because they need to invest less in medications or whatever, and the production are being better for them, then we'll have their own incentive like that. But then on the other hand, there's also these certifications that I was telling you in my speech that are now incorporating welfare criteria. So if the farms want to be certified, they need to cover also this type of criteria, which is more or less equivalent to what is written in the guidelines. And the certificate, the label, is something that people, not consumers, are asking for now because they know a bit more about the animals. So they can, if a farmer, if a company has this certification, then they can be differentiated from the others. So that's a plus for them as well. So right now, I think that's the good thing and what we can push to make these guidelines to expand them to the farms. But of course, the idea is that this is at some point is legislation, and not only what is written right now, but even more regulated and with more criteria. And we need to keep pushing to get that.
So to answer the question, these defaults, they exist. They're not experiments. They tend to be experiments in an institution that has implemented it. So the data I presented comes from the United States, Netherlands, Germany, and I think Sweden was the fourth. Most of these projects are being done in the US. There's a lot of campaigners like the Better Food Foundation and Greener by Default who are working within the United States. I am right now, like as of next Tuesday, going to start formally tracking the spread of these programs, which has not been done before. So I'm aware of about 60 to 70 of these programs. I think there's more. So I'm going to make an interactive map this year on the Faunalytics website, so you can keep an eye out for that. That it is spreading, like it is happening, which is a good thing. A related question, which I think you might have been hinting at, is if people going through plant-based defaults will themselves change their diets, or perhaps. That is not yet studied, and I think we should study that, because if it is able to change people's diets, then it's even a better intervention. If somebody goes to university with a plant-based default, are they going to eat less meat later in their life because they're more familiar with plant-based foods and nutrition and the ethics and things like that? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think anybody does. But to me, I want to see a study about that, because that's a huge lever for change if it is true.
Perhaps we can have one or maximum two more questions and then wrap it up. Is there anyone who has a burning question? Okay, it seems like we're at the end of the event. Ricard, do you want to finish?
Well, actually, there was a question that wasn't fully answered, because Victor asked for the principles or the ideas in OVA and Rethink priorities, and Míriam answered to that, but you, Daniela, didn't. Would you like to go for that?
Could you remind me the question?
Yeah, I was. If I'm not wrong, it was about if in your organizations there was any principles that you were following, addressing. I don't want to.
Yeah. So when you pursue, in this organization, you pursue. Oh. So in the organizations you mentioned, you mostly pursue the reduction of suffering, and all things equal, that is perfectly fine. That's very good. But sometimes reducing suffering can come like you have to balance with other things. Like imagine you have to kill someone to reduce the suffering of an animal. That would be completely unacceptable. So my question is like, are there some thought, like explicit principle, like red lines that we cannot cross, like for example, legality or human rights or even animal rights or something like that, or not promoting animal products actively speaking, some things that are like just, we're not going to do it ever, even if it decreases the amount of suffering by a lot, it's not permissible. That's the question.
Yeah, so I think for us, like, we don't do interventions ourselves. So I think the implications are slightly different, but our moral position, we are against speciesism. That is a position that we reject. Whether we can communicate that publicly or make it that explicit in our reports, that is more of a strategic decision, but it's not, if we don't say it openly, it's not because of moral reasons, it's just because of a strategic choice. And some of the trade-offs that you identify, yeah, those are the things that we try to consider and take into account. For example, if we make, like following your example of, like say, okay, I'm not consuming animal products, I'm choosing veggies, but I know that to produce these vegetables, there are also other animals that are indirectly involved and could be affected. And we try to understand the empirical aspects of those decisions. And morally, it's not just about reducing suffering in isolation, but also considering from a perspective that that individuals respecting the right of, well, the right, or from a different moral position, you could call it differently, but the interest of individuals to have a life as well. And also, we also take into account certain social norms that would facilitate that we take into account the interests of other individuals. So I think roughly those are some principles, but these are very complicated questions, and we try to take them into account from a moral perspective and then understand the empirical aspects. Say, when we make a recommendation for an intervention or for a problem, like what are the indirect effects that we may not see at first?
Okay, so again, please a big round of applause for Daniela, Míriam, and Björn. Thank you very much. And just for you to know, everything here has been recorded in video over there, and is going to be in YouTube soon. So stay tuned if you want to watch anything. And we have a newsletter list there for EA Barcelona. If there's anyone who wants to sign up, we have the list right there, and you will know what activities we are organizing soon in the future. Then, talking about default vegan options and all of that, we have lots of restaurants around here. So we have some recommendations for you to have dinner if you want right now. We have Brutal with a V, and they serve vegan burgers. We have Blue Bar. I think it's the second best vegan restaurant in the world, something like that. Some crazy thing. And then the Soriente, I think it's a fusion of Asian vegan food. And finally, 26 kilograms, kg. And they are all around here. So yeah, taste them if you want. Thank you very much for coming. We are very excited for that. And I don't want to forget, Olad's already reminded us, but there's an exhibition right here about that was opened by CAE. So we also recommend you to see it. I think that you still have time. 2 months. So yeah, but I mean, can they see it right now, or is it closed? Okay. Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you, Kai, for letting us do this event, and thank you for your interventions and your questions and your answers. Thank you very much.